April 12, 1944. The early morning fog clung stubbornly to the jagged peaks of the Apennine Mountains as Lieutenant Marco Ferri tightened the straps of his oxygen mask. At 28,000 feet, his P-38 Lightning cut through the mist, engines roaring like twin predators slicing through the sky. Below him, the enemy supply lines twisted through the valleys, fragile yet vital, carrying the very lifeblood of the German war effort. Marco had flown countless missions over Europe, but there was something different about this one. Intelligence had reported a convoy transporting newly developed German tanks, machines faster, deadlier, and nearly invincible. Allied command had ordered its destruction at all costs. Failure was not an option. Thousands of Allied soldiers depended on the success of this mission. His radar flickered, revealing a small cluster of enemy vehicles moving beneath the cover of the trees. The objective was clear: strike hard, strike fast, and retreat before anti-aircraft fire shredded his aircraft. Yet an uneasy tension gnawed at Marco. Rumors of unusual German aircraft patrolling the skies had reached Allied pilots, planes that defied conventional design, with armored cockpits and unorthodox fuel placements that made them both mysterious and deadly. As Marco closed in on the convoy, the morning sun glinted off the metallic hulls of tanks lined like soldiers on parade. The faint hum of distant artillery mixed with the acrid scent of smoke and fuel carried by the wind. And then, a shadow passed over them. High above, a silhouette unlike anything in Allied intelligence appeared. Marco squinted, trying to make sense of the shape. It moved with a grace and precision that seemed almost unnatural, evading anti-aircraft fire as if it anticipated every move. This was no ordinary German fighter. This was a revelation, a machine that challenged everything the Allies thought they knew about aerial combat. In that moment, a decision had to be made. One split-second choice that would save lives, rewrite intelligence reports, and leave even the most seasoned pilots questioning their understanding of the war. Marco's squadron was about to face not only the enemy on the ground but a threat in the skies that would haunt them for months to come. This was no ordinary morning raid. The consequences of what happened next would ripple across the war, inspiring daring missions, altering strategies, and revealing secrets the Axis had fought desperately to hide. The P-38 shuddered as Marco dove toward the convoy, the roar of the engines almost drowning out the distant thunder of artillery. Trees blurred beneath him, and the wind cut sharply against his face through the open canopy. He could see the German tanks moving cautiously, soldiers scrambling to reposition their defenses, unaware that death was hurtling toward them from the sky. Marco's fingers tightened on the triggers, scanning for the perfect moment to strike. He had trained for this countless times, yet nothing could fully prepare him for the tension of real combat. Each second stretched, the world reduced to a blur of metal, smoke, and the faint glint of sunlight reflecting off armored surfaces. Suddenly, flak erupted from the valley below. Black puffs of smoke blossomed around the convoy, and the ground shook as shells exploded near the tanks. Marco's squadron swerved sharply, dodging bursts of fire, but his eyes remained fixed on the strange plane above. Its movements were precise, almost deliberate, weaving through the chaos with uncanny control. No Allied pilot had ever witnessed such agility combined with raw firepower. As Marco lined up his first attack run, he realized the Germans were not just defending, they were baiting. The convoy's path led into a narrow gorge, the perfect trap for anti-aircraft guns hidden in the cliffs. One wrong move, and his Lightning would be torn apart. Yet retreat was not an option. The tanks were already critical to the Axis war effort. If he failed, thousands of Allied lives could be lost in the next offensive. He pulled the trigger, and tracers streaked across the morning sky. Explosions rocked the valley as shells found their marks, hurling tanks and vehicles into smoke-filled chaos. The enemy scrambled, trying to respond, but Marco's squadron moved with calculated precision, each pilot covering the other. The strange plane above seemed to watch, almost analyzing their every maneuver, its intentions unreadable. Marco's heart pounded, adrenaline surging, as he made a rapid climb to avoid a sudden burst of anti-aircraft fire. The unusual aircraft followed, effortlessly matching his speed. He couldn't understand its design, its tactics, or its purpose. Yet he knew one thing: whatever it was changing the rules of the battle entirely. As the convoy began to scatter and the valley erupted in smoke and fire, Marco felt a grim determination settle over him. Victory in the mission was still possible, but only if he could outthink, outmaneuver, and survive not just the enemy on the ground, but the enigmatic threat in the skies above. The battle had only just begun, and the morning that started like any other would soon become a memory etched forever in the history of the war. Smoke and fire twisted through the valley as Marco's squadron pressed their attack. The German tanks, once methodical and unstoppable, were now scattered like chess pieces under relentless pressure. Explosions flared around them, sending plumes of black smoke into the sky, and the acrid scent of burning fuel filled Marco's cockpit. Every movement demanded precision. One wrong adjustment could send his plane into the cliffs or into the deadly barrage below. Above it all, the mysterious plane continued its silent observation, gliding effortlessly through the chaos. Marco could see its silhouette against the pale morning light, wings cutting through the haze with a fluidity that defied physics. It was as if the aircraft were alive, reading the pilot's every maneuver and calculating its own responses in real time. The enemy soldiers below were desperate. Their coordinated formations had collapsed, and the sound of commands shouted over the roar of engines and artillery was almost drowned out by the relentless explosions. Marco's heart raced as he dived low, strafing the retreating tanks, his machine gun spitting fire with lethal accuracy. Each burst of fire brought destruction, but also a gnawing fear. What was the purpose of the plane above? Was it an escort, a new weapon, or some kind of reconnaissance device unlike anything they had seen? Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the side of the gorge. Marco's plane jolted violently, the shockwave rattling the cockpit. He barely maintained control, pulling upward in a steep climb to avoid the debris. The other pilots followed instinctively, executing synchronized evasive maneuvers, but the mysterious aircraft remained unscathed, weaving through the flak as if guided by an invisible hand. In those tense moments, Marco realized the mission was no longer about the convoy alone. The true test was understanding this new threat and surviving it. His mind raced, calculating angles, speeds, and escape routes, while every fiber of his being screamed to stay alert. One misstep, one hesitation, and everything, the mission, his squadron, even his own life, could be lost in an instant. As they regrouped above the ravaged valley, the convoy's remnants smoldering below, Marco could feel the weight of history pressing down. The Allies had scored a tactical victory, but the presence of the unknown aircraft changed everything. Questions flooded his mind. What did it mean for future missions? How many more were hidden, waiting to strike? And how could they fight an enemy that didn't just challenge them on the ground, but in the very sky itself? The morning raid had begun as a standard mission, but it was becoming a test of human skill against ingenuity, of courage against uncertainty. Marco's hands tightened on the controls, his eyes scanning the horizon. The battle was far from over, and the war had just become infinitely more complex. The P-38s climbed higher, leaving the smoky valley behind, but Marco's mind was still fixed on the mysterious aircraft above. It moved with an almost unnatural grace, anticipating every maneuver, staying just out of reach, neither attacking nor retreating. It was a ghost in the sky, and its presence made the mission feel larger than any ordinary sortie. Below, the remnants of the convoy struggled to regroup. Smoke curled from overturned tanks and burning vehicles, while scattered German soldiers frantically tried to salvage what they could. Marco's squadron circled above, watching, calculating, and preparing for another strike if needed. Every pilot was on edge, the adrenaline from the initial assault still thrumming in their veins. Marco glanced at the enigmatic plane once more. It was as if it were studying them, measuring their skill, probing for weakness. He could not shake the feeling that this was not just an experiment or a reconnaissance flight, it was a deliberate display, a silent message from the enemy. The battlefield had evolved, and old tactics would no longer suffice. His radio crackled, breaking his focus. "Ferri, regroup with the squadron," came the voice of Captain Darnell. "We've neutralized most of the convoy, but stay sharp. That aircraft isn't ordinary." Marco acknowledged the command and pulled his P-38 into formation, the engines whining as they adjusted to the precise spacing needed to maintain tactical advantage. Suddenly, anti-aircraft fire erupted from the cliffs further along the valley. Marco's squadron weaved and banked, narrowly avoiding bursts of shrapnel that exploded like deadly fireworks around them. The mysterious plane followed effortlessly, a predator in its own right, yet it remained elusive, unscathed by the chaos below. For a moment, Marco's mind raced through possibilities. What kind of technology allowed this aircraft to move so fluidly, to avoid every threat? Could it be a prototype, something the Germans had hidden from the Allies until now? And if so, how many more were out there, waiting to change the course of the war? The squadron leveled off above the gorge, assessing the damage below. The convoy had been disrupted, its tanks destroyed or disabled, but the mystery in the sky overshadowed their success. Marco's heartbeat slowed slightly as he caught his breath, but the tension remained. Every pilot knew that the morning's mission had revealed more than enemy positions, it had revealed a new reality of aerial warfare, one that would demand courage, ingenuity, and adaptability in the days to come. As they began their return flight toward Allied lines, Marco could not shake the feeling that the war had quietly shifted. The skies were no longer just a battleground, they were an arena of secrets, and every mission carried the weight of unknown threats. The morning had started with a simple objective, but it ended with questions that would linger long after the smoke cleared. The return flight was tense, the P-38 slicing through the pale blue sky, engines humming with a steady rhythm that belied the chaos they had just left behind. Marco's eyes never strayed far from the horizon. The mysterious aircraft had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only a lingering sense of unease. Every pilot in the squadron felt it, the invisible weight of an enemy they could not fully understand. Below, the terrain shifted from the ravaged valleys to rolling hills dotted with small villages. Smoke from the convoy still lingered, curling into the sky like a silent warning. Marco's mind replayed every maneuver, every burst of gunfire, every moment when the unknown plane had appeared. He couldn't stop asking himself the same questions: what was its purpose, and what did it mean for the battles ahead? As the squadron approached a narrow pass, Marco spotted movement along the cliffs, soldiers, likely reinforcements, rushing toward the valley. The Germans were resilient, their determination unshaken even after the destruction of their convoy. Marco tightened his grip on the controls, signaling the squadron to prepare for another strike if necessary. The adrenaline that had surged earlier returned, sharper this time, mixed with a creeping awareness of the enemy's growing unpredictability. The sky, once a familiar arena of dogfights and calculated maneuvers, now felt foreign. The unknown aircraft had changed the rules. Marco recalled the reports from other pilots about strange German designs, planes with unusual fuel placements, armored cockpits, and maneuvers that seemed impossible. He had witnessed it firsthand, and the implications were chilling. The Allies were facing an enemy that could think beyond conventional tactics, challenging every assumption they had about aerial combat. Suddenly, a warning flare erupted from the valley below. Anti-aircraft fire had been regrouped and aimed directly at them. Marco pulled the P-38 into a steep climb, narrowly avoiding the deadly bursts. The squadron mirrored his moves, each pilot trusting instinct and training to evade destruction. For a fleeting moment, it felt as though the unknown plane might reappear, but the sky remained eerily empty. Its presence, however, lingered in every thought, in every calculated maneuver. As the squadron leveled off above the hills, Marco allowed himself a brief glance at the horizon. The mission had succeeded in part, the convoy had been neutralized, but the encounter with the mysterious aircraft left a shadow over their victory. Allied command would need answers, and soon. The war was no longer just about tanks and infantry, it was about secrets, about ingenuity, and about surviving threats that seemed almost supernatural. Marco exhaled, trying to shake the tension from his shoulders, but he knew it would follow him. Every mission from this point forward would carry the memory of the morning raid, the image of the unknown plane, and the realization that the skies were no longer entirely their own. The war was changing, and the next encounter could be far deadlier. The squadron pressed on, the hills and valleys of northern Italy stretching endlessly beneath them. Marco's eyes scanned every shadow, every cloud, as if expecting the mysterious aircraft to reappear at any moment. The earlier adrenaline had subsided slightly, but a new, colder tension had taken its place, the kind that comes from knowing the enemy is not just strong, but unpredictable. As they approached a small ridge overlooking a river valley, reports crackled through the radio. Reconnaissance units had spotted additional German reinforcements moving along parallel routes, attempting to salvage what remained of the convoy. Marco signaled to his squadron to maintain formation while calculating the best approach to intercept. Precision was essential. One miscalculation could send them straight into anti-aircraft fire, and the thought of facing that unknown plane again added weight to every decision. The air was tense, heavy with smoke from distant fires. Marco's hands gripped the controls, knuckles white, as he banked sharply to avoid a sudden burst of flak. The sky, which had once felt like a familiar battlefield, now seemed alien. Every maneuver required careful thought, every glance at the horizon carried the shadow of the enigmatic aircraft. Its presence had changed the way they approached combat. It was no longer simply a mission of attack and retreat. It was a test of skill, instinct, and endurance against an enemy whose capabilities remained a mystery. As they descended toward the reinforcements, Marco noticed movement along the tree line. Enemy soldiers were deploying portable anti-aircraft guns, and tanks were repositioning in anticipation of another strike. He briefed his squadron silently with hand signals, executing a coordinated dive that allowed them to hit the targets with minimal exposure. Machine gun fire rattled through the valley, and explosions shook the ground, sending plumes of smoke into the morning sky. The German forces fought with desperation, but Marco's squadron moved with precision, their training and experience giving them the edge. Even as they carried out their attack, Marco's thoughts returned repeatedly to the unknown aircraft. It had vanished after the first engagement, but its impact lingered in every calculation. What kind of technology allowed it to perform impossible maneuvers? How many more of these planes were hidden elsewhere, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Each question gnawed at him, a silent reminder that the war had become more dangerous, more complex, and far less predictable. The squadron finally climbed out of the valley, regrouping above the hills as smoke from the destroyed vehicles drifted behind them. Victory had been achieved in tactical terms, but the encounter with the unknown aircraft had left a lasting mark. Allied forces would need to adapt quickly, for the nature of aerial warfare had shifted. Marco exhaled slowly, the weight of the morning pressing down on him, and he realized that the true challenge had only just begun. The war was no longer just about ground battles or predictable air raids. It was now a struggle to anticipate the unexpected, to survive the unseen, and to confront threats that existed beyond conventional understanding. The mission had ended, but its consequences would resonate long after the smoke cleared. The P-38s glided over the rolling hills, their engines cutting through the crisp morning air. Marco's mind, however, remained tangled in thoughts of the mysterious aircraft. Its sudden appearance had thrown everything into uncertainty, and he knew that no amount of training could fully prepare them for what might come next. The war had shifted, subtly, dangerously, and invisibly. Below, scattered remnants of the German forces tried to regroup, but the earlier chaos had left them fractured and disorganized. Marco scanned the terrain for any movement that might indicate an ambush. Every ridge, every copse of trees, seemed like a potential trap. He could feel the tension in his squadron, each pilot aware that the enemy was no longer predictable. The unknown aircraft had become a shadow over their mission, a reminder that control in the sky was no longer guaranteed. As they approached a narrow valley, Marco caught sight of smoke curling from a distant village. Civilians had fled, but the signs of occupation remained: abandoned vehicles, hastily dug trenches, and the faint echo of soldiers' voices carried on the wind. Marco's squadron adjusted formation, maintaining a tight perimeter while flying low to survey the area. Their mission was simple in theory: disrupt any remaining enemy forces, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead made every moment tense. Then came the flash of movement above them. Marco's head snapped upward, eyes straining against the glare of the sun. The mysterious plane had returned, slicing through the clouds with the same precision and grace that had unnerved them hours before. Its presence was no longer passive, it was studying them, testing their reactions. Marco felt a shiver run down his spine. This was no ordinary reconnaissance, it was an assessment, a challenge, a silent assertion that the rules had changed. The squadron braced itself, weaving and banking instinctively, their training guiding every move. Marco's heart pounded, not with fear alone, but with the realization that every decision could determine life or death. The unknown aircraft circled above, almost taunting them, demonstrating the vast difference in capabilities. It was a machine that seemed to anticipate their every tactic, forcing them to adapt in real time, to think faster and fly sharper. Below, enemy soldiers tried desperately to make use of the terrain, firing sporadically from hidden positions, but the squadron's coordination was flawless. Marco led the attack, descending into the valley with precise calculations, destroying what they could while minimizing exposure. The sky seemed to expand and contract with every maneuver, a vast arena where skill and instinct battled against an unpredictable force. By the time the squadron climbed back toward safer airspace, the village and valley below were littered with the remnants of their assault. Victory, in some measure, had been achieved, but the encounter with the mysterious aircraft overshadowed every accomplishment. Marco knew that the war was no longer predictable, that every mission carried the weight of unknown threats, and that survival depended on constant vigilance. The skies of northern Italy, once familiar, had become a proving ground where courage, intelligence, and reflexes were tested against forces they could not fully comprehend. The morning raid was over, but its consequences, and the presence of that enigmatic plane, would haunt them long into the campaigns to come. The afternoon sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the jagged hills. Marco's squadron pressed onward, wary of every ridge, every fold in the landscape. The encounter with the mysterious aircraft had left a mark on their confidence, an invisible pressure that made every maneuver tense, every decision critical. Even in open skies, the threat of the unknown loomed large. Below them, the remnants of the German forces were scattered, trying to regroup and salvage what they could. Marco's eyes scanned the terrain carefully, noting the positions of tanks and troops alike. The convoy was no longer moving as a unified force, but pockets of resistance remained, and they could not afford to underestimate them. Each valley, each ridge, was a potential trap waiting to be sprung. Suddenly, the quiet tension was shattered by the thunder of artillery from a distant ridge. Marco's squadron instinctively broke formation, weaving through bursts of fire while keeping an eye on the skies. The unknown aircraft had vanished again, but its presence was still felt, a ghost haunting the edges of every maneuver. Its return could be sudden, and no one wanted to be caught unprepared. As Marco banked sharply, He noticed movement among the tree leans, German soldiers attempting to establish anti-aircraft positions. He signaled his squadron to descend carefully, striking with precision to neutralize the threat while avoiding exposure. Explosions erupted, shaking the ground below and sending up clouds of smoke and debris. Marco's heart raced, but his focus never wavered. Experience and instinct guided his every move. For a fleeting moment, the valley seemed almost serene, the smoke curling into the sky like silent witnesses to the destruction. Then a sudden glint of metal caught Marco's eye. The unknown aircraft had reappeared, swooping silently through the clouds, observing, calculating, and moving with effortless precision. Marco's pulse quickened. This was no random encounter, it was deliberate, a challenge, and perhaps a warning that the Axis was far more innovative than the Allies had anticipated. The squadron adjusted, flying with heightened alertness, coordinating their movements with a precision born of training and fear. Each attack on the remaining enemy forces was executed with efficiency, yet the shadow of the mysterious aircraft added a layer of uncertainty to every action. The war had become as much about anticipating the unknown as about engaging what was visible on the battlefield. As the smoke cleared and the valley lay in ruin, Marco climbed higher, leading his squadron back toward safer airspace. Their mission had achieved tactical success, but the lessons of the morning and afternoon were indelible. The presence of the enigmatic plane had shown them that the rules of aerial warfare were changing, and that survival now depended not only on skill and courage but on understanding forces that defied conventional logic. The skies were no longer neutral ground, they had become a test, a proving arena where every pilot's instincts would be challenged against enemies seen and unseen. Marco knew the battle was over for now, but the war, and the challenges yet to come, were far from finished. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the Italian hills in shades of gold and crimson. Marco's squadron had maintained altitude, scanning the valleys and ridges below for any signs of lingering enemy activity. The earlier encounters had left them battered but alert, each pilot aware that the war had grown far more unpredictable than they had imagined. The remnants of the convoy were scattered, but small pockets of German resistance remained. Soldiers hastily repaired damaged vehicles, and anti-aircraft positions re-emerged from behind the trees. Marco's hands gripped the controls tighter, guiding the P-38 through a series of calculated turns to avoid potential traps. Every move had to be precise, one misstep could spell disaster. Above them, the sky remained eerily quiet. The unknown aircraft had not appeared for some time, but its absence was more unsettling than its presence. The squadron knew that it could strike at any moment, and the thought of encountering it again hung over them like a shadow. Marco's mind raced, analyzing what they had learned from the previous sightings. This was no ordinary plane, it was a weapon, a test, and perhaps a statement of German ingenuity all at once. As they approached a narrow valley, Marco spotted movement along the ridges. German soldiers were attempting to regroup their defenses, and a handful of armored vehicles were moving into firing positions. Marco signaled the squadron to prepare for a strike, diving with precision and coordinating attacks that minimized exposure to enemy fire. Explosions erupted below, sending plumes of smoke spiraling into the sky, the echo of destruction reverberating through the valley. Even as they carried out their assault, Marco's thoughts remained fixed on the unknown aircraft. What technology allowed it to move with such fluidity? How many more of these planes existed? Could they truly be prepared for what might come next? Each question fueled both caution and determination, driving Marco to push his skills to their limits. The squadron executed their attack flawlessly, but the tension remained. Victory over the convoy and scattered forces was tactical, not complete. The true challenge, the lingering threat that hovered unseen above them, had yet to be confronted. The war had shifted, air and ground battles were now intertwined with elements beyond comprehension, and survival required more than courage, it required adaptation, quick thinking, and the ability to anticipate the unexpected. As the valley fell silent, the squadron climbed higher, returning toward Allied positions. Smoke drifted behind them, a haunting reminder of the destruction left in their wake. Marco exhaled slowly, the weight of the day pressing upon him. The mission had succeeded, but the encounter with the enigmatic aircraft had changed everything. The skies of northern Italy were no longer predictable, they were a battlefield of shadows, secrets, and unknown forces that would challenge every pilot who dared to fly. The war had entered a new phase, and Marco understood that the coming days would demand more than skill, they would demand ingenuity, courage, and the readiness to face enemies both seen and unseen. As the sun sank lower behind the Apennine peaks, the P-38s cut through the golden haze, engines humming steadily. Marco's squadron had returned from the raid battered but intact, yet the tension in the air was far from dissipated. The day had begun with a mission to destroy a convoy, but it had ended with a realization: the war was evolving, and the skies were no longer safe. Below, the valleys bore the scars of battle, smoldering wreckage, shattered vehicles, and the scattered remnants of German forces. The squadron flew over silently, aware that each plume of smoke was a reminder of the destruction they had wrought and the danger they had narrowly survived. Victory had been achieved, but it felt incomplete. The true test had not been the convoy, it had been the mysterious aircraft that had haunted every maneuver, defying logic and forcing them to adapt in ways no training had prepared them for. Marco glanced at the horizon, half expecting the silhouette to reappear, cutting across the sunset with its eerie precision. But the sky remained empty. Even in its absence, the memory of the unknown plane lingered, its movements, its impossible speed, its unprotected fuel tanks that should have been an Achilles heel but were somehow not. Every pilot knew that this was more than a machine, it was a symbol of the war's relentless innovation and the unforeseen dangers that awaited in the coming months. The squadron began their descent toward Allied lines. The men were quiet, each lost in thought, processing the day's events. Marco's own mind raced through the possibilities, considering what this aircraft could mean for future missions, for the strategies of both sides, and for the very outcome of the war. The enemy had shown ingenuity and audacity that demanded respect and vigilance. As they crossed over familiar terrain, the squadron maintained formation, engine steady, eyes scanning the sky. The day's battles were over, but lessons had been learned. The war had shifted, no longer could victories be measured solely by destroyed convoys or captured positions. Now, survival depended on anticipating the unpredictable, mastering the skies, and confronting threats that challenged every assumption they had held about aerial combat. Marco exhaled, the tension easing slightly, though he knew it was only temporary. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the hills in shadows, and for a brief moment, the world seemed still. But the war would continue, relentless and unforgiving, and the unknown aircraft would remain a ghostly reminder that innovation, strategy, and courage could turn any battle into a test of wits and nerve. As night fell over northern Italy, Marco and his squadron returned to base, weary but alive, carrying with them the memory of the morning raid, the echo of explosions, and the haunting presence of a force that had rewritten the rules of the skies. The mission was complete, but the war, and the mysteries within it, were far from over.